Hello everyone, it's me again. And today will be part one of what the DCU never shipped away from Zack Snyder's vision. Like, we all know the history of the DCU. DC tried to make an interconnected universe all the way back in the 2000s, and after Man of Steel, there were discussions and plans to connect Man of Steel in the same universe as Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, but that was then scrapped because Zack Snyder felt that it would have not only overcomplicated things, but would have disappointed a lot of audiences who want to see Christian Bale's Batman fighting Superman, and not a new character under the Batman mantle fighting Superman. And of course, Man of Steel was meant to be its own standalone Superman trilogy, but after the success of the first Avengers movie, Warner decided that they need a cinematic universe to compete with Marvel, and they had to do with DC. And essentially, after BVS, they wanted Jeff Johns and John Berg to take the DCU in a more crowd-pleasing direction, which failed after Suicide Squad and Justice League being the final nail in the coffin, in which it made DC rethink the whole direction of their cinematic universe. John Berg and Jeff Johns then left following the failure of Justice League, brought in Walter Hamada to build up to the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline, but that didn't work, and they hired James Gunn and Peter Safran to reboot the DCEU as a whole. And I think it's off to a great start with Superman, which was a phenomenal start, by the way. Even if Peacemaker Season 2 was a little weaker than Season 1, but still. I can't wait for the future of the DCU. But let's just discuss what the old DCU never shipped away from Zack Snyder's vision, without wasting more time. The first movie would be Man of Steel. It's basically the same movie with some changes. Firstly, a lot of the godlike elements that were implanted in Superman would be scrapped, like the Codex being a part of his DNA, which is supposed to make him the Allspark of Krypton, but that was irrelevant in later movies. That was never brought up in Batman v Superman. It was never brought up in Justice League. Not even in Black Adam. And the reason why Clark came here thing would be dropped. Speaking of Clark coming to Earth, a lot of his childhood would be cut, but Lana Lane would probably have appeared during the bus scene. And am I supposed to let them die? Maybe part would be cut as well to something like, am I supposed to save them? Yes, you need to be a hero. That whole scene with Clark and Jonathan Kent would stay the same, because I do like that scene, despite some flaws in that scene. Speaking of Jonathan Kent, Clark would refer to John and Martha as Mom and Pa or Mom and Dad. And also, instead of Jonathan dying from a tornado, he dies during like a collapsing bridge or something like that. Also, Jessica Biel would play Lois Lane, and Superman would not kill Zod. Instead, there'd be less casualties during the final battle, and Zod would be sent back to the Phantom Zone, and Superman would also be more like his DCAU counterpart, as that is actually my favorite version of Superman. That was my favorite version of Superman. He was the Superman I grew up with as a kid. And the movie would end with Clark attending the Daily Planet, where he would meet Jimmy Olsen. And an after credits scene would introduce Lex Luthor, played by Mark Strachan. Next movie is The Batman. I know it would have been 2 years after the release of The Dark Knight Rises when this one would have came out, but it's really should have been made before BVS. Batman really should have had his own movie before BVS. In terms of the plot, it'd be a mix between the canceled Batfleck film and the Matt Reeves film. Like, elements from each film would be mixed into one. Rather than Deathstroke being the villain, Joker would be the antagonist, and instead of Jared Leto, he would instead be played by Joaquin Phoenix. Deathstroke would still be in this movie, though. And would still be played by Joe Manganiello. Ben Affleck would also still play Batman. Robert Pattinson wouldn't be a full-on recast. He'd only play Batman in his younger years, like during flashback scenes, or at least the opening prologue, which removes his origins and just focuses on his earlier years. Like, we all know who Batman is. We don't need to see his origin story again and again. That also would have been applied to Man of Steel, like the opening likely would have been trimmed down because we all know who Superman is and we did not need to see his origin story again and again. But by the time of the Batman, which would have taken place in 2010, Bruce would have been in his 10th year as Batman. By this point, he would have had Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon as his sidekicks. Dick Grayson at this point would be Robin. Speaking of Dick Grayson, he would be played by Dylan O'Brien, and Barbara Gordon would be played by Leslie Grace. I feel bad for Leslie. She deserved better as Batgirl. Vicky Vale would also appear, and she would be played by Jennifer Gardner, who was Ben Affleck's wife at the time. And their relationship would be akin to Peter Parker and Mary Jane in the first Spider-Man movie. Because whenever I tend to compare Batman's relationship with Vicky Vale, I compare it more to Spider-Man and Mary Jane more than Daredevil and Karen Page. Also, Catwoman would be in this movie, would be played by Marina Bakarian, and by this point, it would be mentioned she had a 4-year-old son, or at least has a 4-year-old son, but he's not really in it much. He's just mentioned. Now, of course, Lucius Fox would also appear, and he would be played by Giancarlo Esposito. And Commissioner Gordon would also appear and would still be played by J.K. Simmons. Now, remember the final battle that was going to be for the Batfleck film that would have had a lot of inmates fight Batman? Yeah, let's just say Joker, Deathstroke, and Harley Quinn, who would likely still be played by Margot Robbie. I feel like she could have still done it. Kill the security guard, or at least some security guards, and let certain criminals out. Speaking of Harley Quinn, there would be this whole side plot between Deathstroke and Harley Quinn where Deathstroke would try to make Harley like Rose Wilson's stepmother. But considering her Rose's rebellious nature, she would likely reject it. But Rose doesn't really appear at all whatsoever. But in terms of the inmates at Arkham during the climax, they would be Mr. Freeze, played by Alfred Molina or Bryan Cranston. Likely the latter. I prefer the latter. Poison Ivy, played by Karen Gillan. Killer Croc, still played by the same actor who played him in Suicide Squad. But he would look more like how he did in the Batman Arkham games. Deadshot, who would be... I'm just going to say this with Deadshot. No offense to Will Smith, but I would want Deadshot to be more like how he was in the Batman Arkham games, and I don't think Will Smith fits that version of the character whatsoever. Instead, he would be played by Pedro Pascal to better fit. KG Beast. Riddler, who would be played by Jesse Eisenberg. And there's one more. I think that's all, honestly. And basically, Batman has this all in all war with a lot of his villains he put up over the years. It's a pretty tough fight, if I'm being honest. And Zack Snyder had confirmed that Dick Grayson was the Robin that died in Batman v Superman. So, Batman would be in Arkham while Dick and Barbara are separated. Dick would be after the Joker, and he's at the warehouse. And unlike what Joker did to Jason by, torturing him, beating him with a crowbar, or leaving him to die, Dick and Joker would have actually got into a fight, and Joker beats Dick and activates a bomb, and boom, the warehouse blows up, and Dick's body wouldn't be found. Bruce would actually try to find what happened to Dick's body, but of course, it's not there, which suggests that Dick may have survived. And that would be leaving his fate ambiguous. But in the end, Batman and Batgirl would defeat the villains. And in the movie, on a bittersweet note. As the movie would end with an after credits scene with Bruce meeting Jason Todd. Next movie would be Batman v Superman. The film would be kind of like the extended version with some changes. Firstly, the opening involving Batman's origins would be cut, and instead it'd be replaced with a scene of Jason being Batman's new Robin. Now, who would play Jason? I'd say Corin Walters, who played in the live-action Teen Titans show. To me, he was born to play Jason. And the character that made the show better. In terms of villains that would have popped up in the years between, some of them would have been Bane, played by Dave Bautista. Mad Hatter, played by someone like Ron Atkinson. Scarecrow, played by Adam Driver. And Professor Pig, played by Dan Aykroyd. They'd be some of the opening montage villains. Similar to the villains that would have fought Batman in the Arkham climax of the previous film. Now, in terms of Jason's backstory, it's honestly pretty sad because, unlike Dick, who was loved by his parents, Jason grew up the opposite life of Dick. Because his father was abusive, and because he had to deal with bullies at school and not wanting to play with other kids his age, and when others teased him, he beat them up. This made his mother deeply concerned about how he would turn out as a person. And when they moved from elsewhere like Forest Lawn or Metropolis to Gotham, things didn't really change much. And when Jason was 11, let's say it'd be 2009, Killer Croc killed his parents. And of course his mother tried to protect Jason, but of course she was killed. It's however implied that Mr. Todd used to bully Killer Croc when they were kids. And Jason was left without a home, and he then came into Batman's hands. The after credits scene of the Batman would have taken place in like 2012. So yeah, early 2010s. Now instead of Jack that would have died in the beginning, it would be Lucius Fox. And rather than Batman killing his villains, he just beats them badly like in Matt Reeves' The Batman. But Jason, he's beating them much worse than Bruce. Vicky assumes it's because of Mr. Todd's abuse. And she wants to help Jason let go of how his father treated him and how Killer Croc killed his parents. But Jason, since this would be one of the more violent versions of Jason, he is prone to treat people like Vicky angrily and just wants to be left alone. The only one he doesn't treat angrily is Barbara, who would have grown close to Jason. Any feelings between her and Dick just didn't exist, because Dick treated Barbara more as a sister. And of course, Bruce just wanted to reach Jason on a more human level. However, Superman's story would be mostly the same, but he and Jimmy are tasked to go to Gotham to investigate a lot of the crime sightings. Kind of like the extended cut bit, just with Jimmy in the action. Joker would also appear and would team up with Lex Luthor and Lena Luthor, who would be played by Rachel Weisz. Joker's henchmen would be Harley Quinn, Deadshot, Killer Croc, Talon, who would be played by Jeremy Sisto, like in Batman vs. Robin, Riddler, and Firefly, who would be played by Jason Clarke. And of course, rather than having the subtitle of Dawn of Justice, it'd have the subtitle of World's Finest. And of course, Superman would figure out that Bruce is Batman and would be like, hey, this isn't like you. I understand why you're beating your villains badly because of what happened with your psychic, but still. And of course, remember when Martha was kidnapped? Yeah, instead, it'd be replaced with a different outcome. Vicky breaks up with Bruce because Bruce would tell Vicky that the reason why he wasn't always there for Vicky was because he was with Selena Kyle, and Vicky couldn't believe that, and so breaks up with Bruce. So yeah, it shows that while Superman's life is at a positive state, despite some issues, even attempting to save some innocent people that got caught in the explosion in the courtroom, Batman's life is going downhill. And rather than wanting to kill Superman, he just wants to neutralize him. And rather than Martha being kidnapped, it'd be Vicky, Lois, and Jimmy. And instead of the scene where Bruce finds out about, all the other heroes, that scene would be cut in favor of Joker giving Bruce a choice. Save Vicky, the woman he loves, or save Lois and Jimmy. Bruce suggests that neither of them can die. However, this doesn't work out well, and Vicky is not only beaten by Joker's henchmen, but Joker kills Vicky in the end. And Bruce just destroys the computer. And then Bruce decides, he killed my girlfriend. And now I'm going to kill him. This suggests that Jason feels like Bruce is now living to what he feels like Bruce should do. Kill his villains. Alfred would be concerned about this. And Superman would come face to face with Batman. They'd still have their fight. But rather than stopping because of their mothers having the same, it's more so because they have one common goal despite their differences. To save the ones they love. even if they lost some of their loved ones like Thomas and Martha Wayne, Vicky, and Jonathan Kent. And Bruce would decide to team up with Superman. And rather than Wonder Woman coming to help, Jason and Barbara would take down Joker's henchmen, replacing Wonder Woman's role in the final battle. And instead of Doomsday, they fight Metallo. Joker, of course, gets away because Batman decides to not kill Joker. Superman would, of course, assumed to have died. Jason leaves Batman after an argument that Batman should have killed Joker at that point in time. Like, at that moment in time, but Jason just leaves. Even Barbara tries to stop him. The ending would reveal that Superman survived his fight with Metallo and would face someone like Parasite, and Superman's survival would be confirmed by Martian Manhunter, disguised as General Sonswick. And Batman would face off someone like Mr. Freeze at the end. There would be an after-credits scene where we see a dead villain known as Anarchy. And of course, Jason would say the final words to close out this film. And these words would also be loosely inspired by the final monologue from the Morgue Files Case 2, which was about Jeff the Killer. October 11th, 2015. This will be my final entry. I've been on my own, leaving Bruce for 2 weeks. 2 weeks! Reliving the night. Killer Croc. Kill my parents. Over and over again! 2 weeks! Feeling the anger burning inside me. My whole life I've been told there was something wrong with me, and they were right. I've been trying to so hard to suppress what I am, and it hurts. All I can think about is hurting everyone. There's a constant screaming in my head, telling me, begging me to kill them all. If you're reading this, Bruce, you know my story. You've heard my name. You've seen the aftermath. And at the end, we would see Jason, not in his Robin suit, but in his Red Hood outfit, holding Anarchy's knife, which he used to kill him with, setting up the Red Hood storyline. Next movie is Wonder Woman. Movie is the same, except Ares would be revealed to be Danny Houston's character, not Sir Patrick. And a lot of the CGI during the final battle would be cut down. Next movie is The Flash. The movie would ditch the Flashpoint storyline for later on. Instead of Ezra Miller, who was a terrible person, he's a pretty terrible person, honestly, Flash would instead be played by Sam Claflin. And the film would be more street level. In terms of the villains, they'd be the Rogues, consisting of Captain Boomerang, played by Jai Courtney still, Mirror Master, played by Scott Eastwood, Heatwave, not too sure who could play Heatwave, I guess maybe Jason Statham, Weather Wizard, played by Diego Luna, perfect casting, Captain Colt, who would serve as the main villain, played by Taron Egerton, and Golden Glider. I'm not too sure who could play Golden Glider, though. But this would focus on Barry's origins as the Flash. And the film would take elements from the Rogue storyline of the Flash. And of course, Iris West would appear, and at the end of the film, like in an after credits scene, Amanda Waller would meet Captain Boomerang and Mirror Master and would give them an invitation to join the Suicide Squad. Kind of like that after credit scene from Batman Arkham Origins where Amanda Waller insisted in Deathstroke joining the Suicide Squad. Speaking of Suicide Squad, next movie is Suicide Squad. The film would be more akin to the Ayer cut and would have like ditching the pop song so it would feel less like a music video so we can focus on what David Ayer had intended for this film. The team is mostly the same, except Slipknot would be replaced with Sportsmaster, who would be played by Titus Weaver, and Katana would be replaced with Cheshire, who would be played by Kieran Fukuhara still. They missed a perfect casting right there. And Deathstroke would act as a spy working for the squad. And Joker would have more to do in this film and would be the secondary villain, while Enchantress is still like the main antagonist. And she and Joker would be in a relationship instead of her and Rick Flag. And Enchantress's henchman would be replaced with Joker's henchman. And Bane would replace Incubus. And remember the one scene when El Diablo was leaving the squad? Yeah, that would instead be Deathstroke to hint at the fact that he is actually the spy. And there would be a scene where Sportsmaster and Deathstroke fight akin to the one they had in Young Justice, and Sportsmaster would actually try to kill Captain Boomerang, but Rick Flag would detonate Sportsmaster's bomb, killing him because he thinks Sportsmaster might be the spy. And at first, Rick Flag feels like they took care of the spy. But little do they know, they didn't get rid of the real spy. Remember the one scene with Deadshot shooting? Yeah, that be dropped, and at some point in the film, Jason Todd would come to Zoe Lawton's house, and she would be played by Emma Tremblay, and as of now, she's living with her mother. Not too sure who could play her mother, though. However, as soon as she opens the door, Jason kills Miss Lawton, and then kidnaps Zoe. Now, the reason why Jason does this is because he finds out that Rose Wilson was bullying Zoe at their school. And that reminded Jason of the bullying he experienced. Deathstroke is aware of the bullying, though. Remember the bar scene? Yeah, rather than getting information about just El Diablo's backstory, which would be altered, Sportsmaster would have El Diablo's backstory of being rejected by his wife, but would not have killed his whole family. El Diablo's backstory is that his family was killed when he was being experimented on by mad scientists. We learn more about Harley Quinn, Killer Croc, and Deadshot's backstories. Harley Quinn is revealed to have suffered psychological abuse from her mother. And speaking of abuse, a lot of the scenes that involved her abusive relationship with Joker would be kept. And of course, Deadshot would relate to Harley on this because he was abused by his father. And killed him. Because Harley did kill her mother. And a lot of the romance between Harley Quinn and Deadshot would be kept as well, because it was important to the story. And Killer Croc would have had a backstory where he was abused by his father and was bullied and, of course, killed his parents and bullies. Rick Flag still detonates the bombs on the other members except for Harley Quinn, because Joker would have detonated it. Harley would have jumped out because of the fact that she found that Joker dumped on her with Enchantress. And Deathstroke's spawn would have also been deactivated by Joker. And Deathstroke would bring some of Joker's henchmen into the bar, and this leads to the squad getting captured. And Deathstroke betraying the squad would be similar to how Mac betrayed Indy and Indiana Jones in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Speaking of that movie, the squad would be taken in a truck, and the argument Indy and Marion had would be similar to the argument that Deathstroke and Deadshot would have about having feelings for Harley. It'd be kind of like that. During the final battle, El Diablo had a difficult time facing Bane, but he would manage to overpower Bane in the end. Enchantress would unleash her powers on the squad via the Mother Box, like in the Ayer cut, to send the squad into the shame rooms. It's kind of like the final battle of Thunderbolts. And Jason would be there. Harley Quinn would see the abuse she suffered from her mother, and how she killed Mrs. Quinzel. Deadshot seeing the abuse he suffered from his father and killed him and his brother. First it was his brother on accident, then it was his father the second time. Jason and Killer Croc would see their backstories, as well as El Diablo. Cheshire would see her backstory and how her family was connected to slavery, and how she was bullied at school for liking white cats. And of course, Captain Boomerang would see his backstory of how he was always a failure at playing Boomerang. And we get some clues to the Joker's backstory as well, which also would have been set in the Batman. Like Joker being a former gangster who worked for a criminal like Black Mask or Penguin, and he was once a criminal named Jack Napier, until he was put into a vast of chemicals after a fight with Batman. And of course, we see that Joker killed his mother, and everyone who mistreated him. And of course, Deathstroke's backstory is that his wife, who was once a loving person, began to abuse him and Rose after drinking some alcohol, and would have shot Slade's eye. And this also gives Rose a reason as to why she bullies Zoe. But his motive, Deathstroke's motive of Grant's death would stay, not Jericho. Because I'd say in the Batman, it would be said that Joker may have killed Grant. It wasn't a fight with the Teen Titans that killed Grant. And it'd also be revealed that Jason does not support Joker and Enchantress's relationship. And rather than Rick Flag being the one to kill Enchantress, she'd be injured after being shot by Deadshot, and then Joker is going to kill the squad when they refuse to join him. Kind of like the Ayer cut. But before he could detonate the bomb, and instead of Harley swiping the bomb away from Joker, Jason would come behind Joker and stab him with Slade's sword. And then he takes the sword out. And yes, this is where Joker dies. Much like in Batman 89 and Arkham City. Enchantress would try to get up, but due to the gunshot wound, she is then held by Jason, and Jason gives Rick Flag a choice. Have Enchantress or turn the squad over. But Rick Flag decides not to turn the squad over, and so Jason ends up killing Enchantress by stabbing her 5 times. 4 with his knife, and the last time with Slade's sword. And then Rick Flag tries to shoot at Jason, but Jason just punches his Rick Flag, leaving a scar on his face. It's more so a slash, but still. He then proceeds to kill El Diablo and Bane. And of course, then leaves Captain Boomerang blind. And then, of course, proceeds to slash away at Cheshire's face, leaving scars on her face. And then he beats Deadshot in front of his daughter and nearly kills him. But he stops because he realizes Zoe was actually his age, 11 when he lost his parents. And so he stops. This could be told from Deathstroke or Deadshot, whatever works best. But Jason would see Killer Croc and they get into a fight. And Jason just brutally kills Killer Croc by chopping off his arm and then stabbing him. And then proceeds to stab Killer Croc twice in the face, killing him instantly. And then he comes to Harley Quinn. And it would be established that Jason knew that Harley Quinn was an accomplice to some of Joker's actions. And maybe to Dick's assumed death, or most likely not, but she was not an accomplice. And so Jason proceeds to relentlessly beat her by chokeslamming her and punching her and beating her with her bat, and then hit her with a piece of debris, leaving her knocked out cold. And then Jason stops. And then, before he leaves, he comes face to face with Batman, his former mentor. And they have a fight, which is a mix between the one they had in the Under the Red Hood film and the Arkham Knight game. And when Batman beats Jason, something happens. Jason begins to laugh. And Jason would take off his helmet. He is not the Red Hood anymore. He has become the new Joker. And then throws Batman a gun. And proceeds Batman, begging him to kill him. Bruce is resistant to kill. And of course, Jason tells Bruce, what was his worst fear? Losing his parents, losing his girlfriend. Not Catwoman, but Vicky Vale. Losing a sidekick, or all of the above. And as soon as those words came, Batman just gives up. It's kind of like Batman Beyond, where Bruce gave up because of a gun. But it's not because of a difficult choice, but because of what happened with his sidekick. He would then come meet face to face with Batgirl, and they have an argument about Jason now being the new Joker and being beyond saving. That would be like the scene with Rey and Luke arguing in Star Wars The Last Jedi, where they argued about Kylo Ren being beyond redemption. But unlike that scene, Batgirl and Jason have known together longer than Rey and Kylo Ren. And Barbara feels hurt. She then leaves Bruce because she believes Jason can still become a good person in the end. Batman then would come face to face with Killer Moth, trying to fight him, but he refuses to hurt Killer Moth because of his traumatic experience with Jason. The news would then break out that Batman is now a controversial figure. Some condemn him for being responsible for Jason's actions, while others defend him by saying he was just trying to stop Jason. By this point, Cheshire would have had casts on her face and would get the cat mask. in a museum while Harley Quinn is sent to the hospital. But Bruce just has enough. He needs to give up being Batman once and for all. And in the Batman, Joker would say that as long as he's Batman, tragedies like this will continue to happen. And that would come here. Not just in this film, but also BVS. Deathstroke would be the one to return Deadshot to his daughter because he feels bad for what happened. And this resolves the conflict they had earlier in the film, and can also resolve the conflict between Zoe and Rose, maybe. As for the ending, it would be similar to that in Spider-Man, the new animated series, where Peter Parker gives up being Spider-Man. Batman would, of course, say these words. They're right, of course. Too bad nobody told me that being a superhero was an impossible game to win. Or the ones closest to me would always suffer the most. Some hold a grudge against me, and some who try to give me so much, only to lose everything. I don't want to cause any more pain here. I can't live with that burden any longer. So it's time for me to say goodbye, Batman. And then he would throw a suit in the trash can. The monologue about those who have a grudge against him would be Two-Face's former best friend, who would have been played by Matthew McConaughey, would have been one of the villains during the Arkham climax in the Batman, and Talia al Ghul, who may have had feelings for Bruce but was rejected by Bruce, and would be played by Selma Hayek. Ra's al Ghul would also probably appear during the climax of the Batman and would be played by Benicio del Toro or Hiroyuki Sanada. But as Bruce is walking away, he sees himself in a mirror. Not as Bruce, but as Batman. Then Batman just walks off. As the last shot of the film would focus on the Batsuit. The after-credits scene would not be of Bruce meeting up with Amanda Waller, but remember David Harbour's character? Yeah, instead of being Dexter Tolliver, he would be Ethan Bennett. Thus setting up as Clayface, in which they would not discuss about Task Force X, but instead the whole should they have the squad face against Jason Todd as the new Joker, or just leave it at Batman. And Amanda Waller would suggest leave it at Batman. As Dexter is leaving and getting to his car, we would see a silhouette of Jason as the new Joker watching. Next movie is Aquaman. Movie is the same except Amber Heard would play Mera, and a lot of the references to Justice League would be cut. Next movie is Justice League. This would be the culmination of Phase 1. It's kind of like the same film, but with elements of the Snyder Cut. Like, because of the ending of Suicide Squad, Bruce does not come back as Batman immediately. He's still hesitant after what happened in Suicide Squad, and the film would take place a year after Suicide Squad. He's then decided to try and become Batman again because of Terry, Selena's 11-year-old son, and he would be playing Noah Jupe. Martian Manhunt should be the one to convince Batman to join the League, and Bruce would become Batman again after being initially reluctant. And Bruce would tell Terry, before being recruited, about Dick, Jason, and Vicky. The team would be mostly the same, except rather than Cyborg being a member, Cyborg would have a smaller role. His role in the team would be filled in by Green Arrow, played by Charlie Hunnam, and Black Canary, who could have still been played by the same actress who played her in Birds of Prey, or maybe someone else like Vanessa Kirby. And Batman would talk about his history of sidekicks, and that would be related to Green Arrow and Black Canary because Their sidekick Red Arrow, Roy Harper, left them due to his relationship with Cheshire, which Green Arrow did not support at all in the slightest. And of course, Dinah would be pregnant with Oliver's child. And Superman would also have more to do in this film. And since Bruce has not been Batman in months, let alone a year, there'd be a training montage scene where they train Bruce to become Batman again, back to his feet. Steppenwolf would look more like how he did in the Snyder Cut and would have a similar motivation to the Snyder Cut, which means, yes, Darkseid would be in this movie. And during the final battle, Oliver and Dinah would sit out because Dinah would go into labor and Oliver has to help her give birth to their child, who would be Oliver Lance Queen, their son from the Injustice games. And Steppenwolf would be beheaded like in the Snyder Cut. And the ending would be reminiscent of Avengers Endgame. Aquaman would return to Atlantis to reunite with Mera and his parents. Flash would reunite with Iris West and would meet her nephew Wally West, who would be played by Harry Holland, Tom Holland's real-life brother. Martian Manhunter disguised as Son Swick would return in, would give Superman back to Jimmy, Lois, and Martha. And at the end, it's revealed that Lois is pregnant with Clark's child. And of course, Sam Lane would hear about the news because he would be there, and he would have also been in Man of Steel. In terms of who had played Sam Lane, I'd say maybe someone like William Hurt, since he was kind of like the DC version of Thunderbolt Ross. Green Arrow and Black Canary would retire from being heroes so they could take care of their son. And Bruce would initially consider giving up being Batman again, but then decides that he needs to be Batman again. And he made the right decision. He returns to Wayne Manor to find Terry in a homemade bat suit, inspired by Batman Beyond. And it would be revealed that Terry is not just Selina's son. Bruce is actually his father. And Bruce decides that, you know, he needs a sidekick still, but not another Robin, but something different. The movie then ends with a family walking until they find a dead Copperhead. And they meet Jason Todd as the new Joker, in an outfit that's inspired by Joker from Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker. And it would be mentioned that Jason had killed different villains in Gotham in between Suicide Squad and Justice League, like Tarantula, Egghead, as well as Condiment King, and Firefly and Electrocutioner. And then the movie would end with Jason finding out that Bruce is back as Batman, and of course, he would meet Terry as Batman's new sidekick. I don't know what Terry's new superhero name would be. Probably Batboy, something like that. And then the movie would then end with the three of them actually beginning to fight. As for the after credits scene, rather than Deathstroke meeting Lex Luthor, there would be a criminal in San Francisco who would be stopped by someone. And of course he would go, "Hey, this is your town. Aren't you supposed to be with..." But then the person says, "I've been here for a while now. And from now on, I work alone." And out of the shadows would turn out to be Dick Grayson, who had survived his encounter with the Joker and the Batman. But he's not Robin anymore. He is now Nightwing. So that's what if the DCU never shifted away from Zack Snyder's original vision. Well, part 1 at least. I got parts 2 and 3 mostly mapped out. Mainly part 2, but part 3 a little bit. But anyways, I'll see you all later.